If you're a Korean speaker learning Japanese, have you ever had that weird feeling of déjà vu? You hear a Japanese word and you think, wait a second, that sounds really familiar. Well, guess what? It's not your imagination. There is a secret code that connects these two languages. And today, we're going to crack it wide open.
I mean, just look at this. The Korean word for school, hakyo, and the Japanese word, gakko. The characters are exactly the same, and the sounds, they're incredibly close. So is that just some random one-in-a-million coincidence? Or is there something much, much bigger going on here?
It is absolutely not a coincidence. This quote really hits the nail on the head. Because Korea, China, and Japan all use Chinese characters, their languages are linked. They've all borrowed from the same source, creating this kind of shared linguistic DNA. And that DNA has a predictable code. So let's dive in and see how it works.
So here's our game plan for today. We'll start by confirming why this is totally inevitable, not a coincidence. We'll look at the history, and then we are going to crack the code using just one character as our key. After that, we'll turn that key into a whole new way of learning, talk about why it's not always a perfect match, and then finally, put this new superpower right in your hands.
All right, first up, let's lay down the foundation for this whole idea. It's all about a shared heritage. The secret key has a name. In Japanese, it's called On-yomi, and in Korean, it's umdok. These are the pronunciations that were borrowed directly from Chinese, way back when. So you can think of them as the imported, sound-based readings. And this is where all the predictable patterns live. Now, this is super important, so really lock this in. The patterns we're about to uncover, they only work for these on-yomi readings. The native Japanese readings, which are called kunyomi, they play by a completely different set of rules. So for our purposes today, we are focusing 100% on the sound-based on-yomi.
Okay, so how did this shared system even come about? Well, it's a really cool story of how ideas travel across centuries.
It all started, of course, in ancient China, where these characters were born. Around the 4th century, they traveled over to the Korean peninsula. Then, a little later, they were passed on from Korea to Japan. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, both languages started to adapt these characters, and their pronunciation slowly drifted and changed, which is how we ended up with the distinct but clearly related sounds we hear today.
Okay, enough history and theory. Let's get our hands dirty. We're going to prove this works with a real-world example.
And here is our star witness for today, the character ko. You know it from the Korean word for school, hakyo. It's the gyo character. We're about to see just how predictable its Japanese pronunciation really is.
Okay, check this out. This is where it all clicks. There is such a clear pattern here. The Korean sound gyo consistently becomes the Japanese long vowel ko. So gyoga becomes koga. Gyomen, it becomes komon. Gyobuk turns into kofuku. See? It's a direct, predictable change, almost every time.
Now, there is one small variation to this rule. Sometimes the Korean jo can also pop up as kyol in Japanese. A perfect example is hyugyo, which becomes kyukol. So it's a tiny bit different, but still very, very similar and easy to predict.
So how can you actually use this? Well, this is where you stop trying to memorize everything by brute force and start using intelligent deduction. It's a game changer.
It's a really simple 3-step process. First, just pick a Korean word that you already know is based on Hanja, like hakyo. Step 2, break it down into its sounds, hak and gyo. And finally, step 3, apply the sound change rules we just talked about. We already know gyo becomes ko, and as we'll see, hak becomes got. And boom, just like that, you've figured out gakko. You didn't memorize it, you deduced it.
And here's a little cheat sheet for some of the most common patterns you'll see. A Korean syllable that ends in a vowel, like gyo, often turns into a long vowel in Japanese, like kol. If it ends with a giuk consonant, the bachim, like in hak, that usually becomes a k sound, like k, ki, or that little ut stop. And a final nien consonant, like in un, almost always becomes the Japanese n.
And now look at the payoff. This is the real power. Once you know hakyo is gakko, you haven't just learned one word. You've unlocked an entire family of words. Elementary school, 초등학교, is shogakko. Middle school, 중학교, is 중학교. High school, 고등학교, is 고등학교. Learning one single pattern can literally give you dozens of new words for free. Okay, so I know what you might be thinking. If this is a rule, why isn't it a perfect one-to-one match every single time? Well, that all comes down to centuries of language evolution. The absolute best way to think about this is like linguistic cousins. The Korean and Japanese On-yomi readings both come from the same ancestor, that original Chinese pronunciation. But over hundreds of years, they've drifted apart, developing their own unique accents, their own little sound shifts and quirks. So they're clearly related, but they're not identical twins.
And let's just hammer this point home one more time because it is so, so important. This prediction system works for On-yomi, the sound-based readings that came from Chinese. It does not work for Kunyomi, which are the native, meaning-based Japanese readings. Knowing which one you're dealing with is a huge part of mastering the language.
So what does this all mean for you as someone learning Japanese? It means you have a massive hidden advantage. You have a head start. Think about this. It's estimated that somewhere between 50 and 60% of the entire vocabulary in both Korean and Japanese comes from these Chinese characters. That's more than half the dictionary. It's a huge, huge overlap. The bottom line is this. If you speak Korean, you are not starting your Japanese journey from scratch. Not even close. You are walking in with a massive vocabulary list already in your brain. You just need the key to unlock it and translate it. So let's end with a little challenge. You know the Korean word for safety, 안전. The Japanese word uses the exact same characters. Based on the patterns we've talked about, what's your best guess for the Japanese pronunciation? The answer to that question, right there, is your first step to a brand new way of learning.